All right, guys, I started the recording. Good morning, everyone. Today is November 21st, 2024. Welcome to another Federal Fiscal Grants Communities of Practice. We are excited to have everybody here and make sure that you know that you're an integral part of our community. And we're just really excited to have everybody on today. As a reminder, we are recording this for those who cannot attend. So to get going, because we have a full agenda as we always do, I want to make sure that we put this out there in the universe so that you know the timing of how we're going to go through each part in case you've got to jump off and jump back on. We know people come in and get interrupted and things happen. So we'll always start, if we can, with our congratulations and shout outs. We'll go through a quick glance through that data acquisition calendar specific to mostly our federal programming, in case you guys have things you want to bring up about that and some of the dates or some of the submissions. We want to make sure that we highlight grant closeout period is upon us. A lot of grants ended in September, and we're going to have some specifics on that from some of our ESSER folks on the federal programs team. We're going to talk about some of the partial federal grant allocations that have gone out. Specifically different this year for IDEA programs. We gave out about a third of funding. So just to make sure if you guys have questions, you can ask those. We'll also go through a new push that we're having this year in the legislative session for a special needs fund for those high cost special education students. So we'll talk about that and how we can hope that you can help advocate for that. We'll do a super quick recap of October. We'll also go into some hot topics, news, and legislation because, believe it or not, some political things have happened lately that may change some of the way we do things around here. And then fiscal monitoring trending. We are in that season again of some of you guys in the midst of monitoring, others just wrapped up. And so we want to share kind of some trends that we see because, again, we don't want anyone to have a finding. And a lot of our LEAs are really close and they're not quite there. So we're going to talk about that so you guys can take a look at your own process and see what you might need to change. Within that is that PD, the professional development in 15, where we're talking about the policies versus procedures. A lot of the findings that we have are related to one or the other or both lacking. So we'll talk about that. And you guys know the uniform grant guidance has changed. So we want to make sure that this year we have a chance to get those new changes adopted. And we'll talk about some efforts with ISBA that are going on for that. All right, so let's just dive in. Last month I had a kind of like a Thanksgiving-y look, and fall look, but this month I have the winter because it's snowing. There's snow in the mountains everywhere now. So I want to start with celebrating that many of you guys passed levies. Oh my gosh. So let's put some celebration in the chat and clap and pat ourselves on the back for all the efforts that may have gone into that. Winter is here for sure. And put in something in the chat or stop and think about what are you actually excited for winter. I feel like winter is another season, obviously, of change where it changes a lot of our habits. We go from cold drinks to hot drinks. You know, I had my first pumpkin spice latte. It felt like winter. So I know that a lot of things have changed, but I got to start with those levies, man. Those levies were amazing. So you guys, let's all celebrate what you guys have been able to do to sustain outcomes for students with those levies. Wow, you guys asked for a lot and the voters came through for you guys. So we really want to make sure that we highlight that. And all four of the plant facilities levies passed. That was huge. And really, if only three of the supplemental levies failed, that's huge too. So, for all those guys that did pass, I know you guys are just a huge relief to be able to maintain systems and or perhaps even add to whatever it was that you were doing for staffing and otherwise with those funds. Another thing I just wanted to highlight is the facilities funding and the clarifications that went out were huge for you guys. That is something to celebrate. Some of this money went out and you guys are probably seeing it come in. So I know that it's still subject to change and more expenses clarified perhaps this session and otherwise, but I did put a link to a report in here how some of the items have been clarified that you can talk about for the use for some preventative maintenance and building repairs. So that was huge. A lot of you guys mentioned that it was detrimental before. So definitely this is exciting and more to come, and the next batch of bonds will be going out. So I know that we'll have more reporting on that that'll come our way and that you'll see in the local news as well. But that is something to celebrate. So just know that we always celebrate you guys when we see those things come in. And if anybody wants to share stuff in the chat, I am keeping an eye on it, but we want to make sure you guys always have a chance to bring that up. But we're going to dive into the radar as we speak. So November was big, and this is filtered. I always filter these things. So this is not all inclusive of everything at the state, but really I look usually at public school finance, special ed, and the federal programs for the filters. There was a lot due. And the reason that I left the public school finance in here for the month of November is that your audit reports were due, and guess what? We're looking at them as we're analyzing your application data that you're putting in for us for your reporting. Because if some numbers don't make sense and they look like they might have been, I don't know, fat fingered, or why did your maintenance of effort double? We open those and we look at them. So it's important to us. We know it was a big effort for you guys to get through those CPA audits, but we are using them for the work that we're doing with you. And then also the iFarms data came through. Those IC submissions were coming in. There's a lot of other budgets and applications for CFSGA and IDEA were due. There's other federal programming reports that were due. A ton for districts and charters. Okay, so this is just to remind you guys, hey, did I miss anything? I don't think anyone did Form 6 for virtual FTE forms, right? So if you think you missed one, you're just not sure, take a pause, go through your groups there and say, hey, I just want to make sure somebody did this report. And if not, give us a holler. We've got the person here, the contacts that you can reach out to say, I missed my child count. I need to do that still. What do I do now? So that we can help you through that. Now, December is also heavily filtered here, just special ed and federal programs this time. There's a lot of school finance, but I really just wanted to look at the two federal things just to get this out because we know that there's going to be a big holiday break. And as you see, there's quite a few reports that are due at the beginning. This general supervision file review, GSFR for special ed directors, that's a big one. The child count corrections are due for special education students. So they were due this last month in November, and then that's your second chance there if you have things you need to fix or resubmit. There's quite a few deadlines in here right before the holiday break. And then there's a couple of big ones that are due still within the month. Both to the federal programs team for that consolidated plan revision, and then also for those indicator 11 timelines specific to special ed. There are more data points that you guys have to report on. So we know that's a heavy lift. So I know it's important for you guys to have it on your radar and be able to time your own inner workings of your time management, right? Okay, now we're going to jump into the GRA closeout periods, documentation discussion, and some insights. And this is kind of a big couple of slides here to talk about. So we're going to stop with time out, everybody. Go look in the GRA and see what you have expiring. You may notice you've been contacted by the federal programs team or from special ed recently to say, hey, did you know you still have money in there? Please don't leave money on the table. We know that you were busy closing out last year, but the first quarter is over. We're in the midst of that final closeout period, so you can still kind of draw it down like an accrual for your activities that may have been for that time period under obligation timing. And with that, I'm going to turn that over to the biggest program that you guys know has expired recently, which is ESSER. And Lisa English from the federal programs team is going to take a few minutes to talk about some really important pieces there. All right, Lisa, you're up.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for having us. We appreciate you including us on these. So just a couple quick reminders, guys. Salaries and benefits for work after September 30th, 2024 can no longer be paid from ESSER funds. Please make sure that you're now paying those positions that you hired or have been paying with ESSER funds out of another funding source. So any positions that you've been paying with ESSER after September 30th, 2024 can no longer be paid with ESSER. So make sure you're watching those. No new purchases. Any remaining funds that you have are for liquidating purchases only. Um, all your funds must have already been obligated. Um, this is not the time to be purchasing new items. Don't go out and make any new purchases. If you do not have a contract or a purchase order, anything prior to September 30th, um, remember obligation deadlines. I put this little chart up here for you guys to look at. Remember that obligation is, for acquisition of real or personal property, services, performance of work, on the date which a binding written commitment to obtain services, to obtain work, to acquire the property. Obligation is made when those written commitments, those contracts were signed. They had to have been signed by September 30th. So anything after that date, guys, you can't be doing anything after September 30th. So this is not the time to be making new purchases. All ESSER funds need to have been obligated by September 30th. So at this time, everything needs to be in liquidation phases. Same goes for final construction payments. If you still have a construction renovation project that will continue at this point, anything that's still in process after January 10th, you will have to find another way to complete those payments on those projects. Remember, you cannot prepay completion of those projects. You cannot hold back funding for those projects. You may be reimbursed any invoices that you receive up until January 10th. So as long as those contracts and projects were approved before September 30th, you can liquidate funds up until January 10th. Until then, that's fine, but after January 10th, you need to find a new funding source. As for your last GRA drawdowns for ESSER, again, it's going to be January 10th. After January 10th, those funds are going to disappear. So please make sure that you are getting those in. Make sure that you're getting those in, hopefully prior to January 10th in case there's any issues. I'm going to do everything in my power to get, if there's any issues, to get back to you prior to 5 o'clock on January 10th. I'll be calling, trying to reach out. I'm going to try not to send those back at 4:30 on January 10th. But if you're sending them in at 5 o'clock on the 10th, we'll do all we can to get them through. But please make sure you guys are getting those in just as soon as possible prior to that. So anything on the 11th, 12th, out of luck. So make sure you guys are really paying attention to those deadlines. Okay, on to the next one. This one is for title funds. It's kind of the same thing. Final drawdown for your grant titles. The 21 and 22 title grants, like Title 1A, Title 1C, for these are December 29th of this year. After that date, those grants will disappear, just like the ESSER funds from the GRA. You'll no longer have access to them to do a drawdown request. Please submit any drawdown requests to these grants prior to December 29th in order to follow or to allow for review and approval or revision if necessary. Any funds left in those 21 and 22 funds or in those grants will be returned to US Ed. So please, let's get those paid down. They're for you guys to use. Lots of good uses. Let's try not to get that money back to US Ed. Let's try and get those uses for you guys. And on the last slide here is going to be for the CFSGA. Go ahead and advance that one. Final allocations are complete and all CFSGs were unsubmitted for revision. Title 1A, 1C, 2A, and 3A all had allocation changes. 4A did not. Many LEAs saw increases in their final allocation amounts and some saw decreases, unfortunately. Please review the adjusted allocations and revise the budget tab of the CFSGA as needed. Please also review the prior year expenditure tab for each grant, as now would be a good time to put actual in for the expenditures in order to get an accurate carryover amount. Michelle, I'm sorry, did you have anything you wanted to add to this slide real quick?
Oh, thank you, Lisa. So just a reminder, if you still have an unsubmitted CFSGA, to resubmit it as soon as possible. And then the ones that are currently submitted, our program coordinators are reviewing it, and it's our top priority to get those reviewed and approved. And once everything has been approved in your CFSGA, you will receive a new GAN that has your adjusted amounts in it. Thank you.
Okay, Lisa, that should be us for us. Thank you.
Great. We did have a question that came in from Michael Jacobson. What will be the process for trying to apply for funds that weren't used by other districts? And so I think that might be a question for our federal team. Do we have any reallocation plans, possibilities? I know like when we liquidated our ARP funds for IDEA, we tried to see if there were folks that we could see weren't spending, and we asked if there was going to be any last attempt to use those funds in case we had time to reallocate. But because we're so late in the game, Lisa English, did you want to kind of address if there's any plans for reallocations?
Yeah, we did a big survey trying to find out if there was going to be enough funds to do that process. And when we did the survey, there did not seem to be enough funds to justify a reallocation. So for ESSER funds, we are hoping that those who said they were going to use them all are going to use them all, and that they're going to go to, good use. So unfortunately, at this time, there's not going to be any reallocations for the ESSER funds. So we're very sad for that. We know that there's a lot of districts still hoping for that, but no, at this point, we're hoping that they are still being going to good use.
Thank you, Lisa. It looks like that was what he was looking for. And there's probably a lot of folks that were wondering, because sometimes we do have the ability to do that, but sometimes if we only pull back a little tiny bit, you can only split a penny so many ways, and it's not worth having everybody redo their budgets for $5. So
exactly.
That's something where it's value add too for your time. We have to see what makes most sense. So thank you.
You bet.
So yeah, everybody make sure you're taking a look in the CFSGA. And if you're not the person that looks in or in the CFSGA and the GRA, where you do the reimbursements, if you're not the person that goes in there to see what's sitting in there in the bank account, so to speak, for federal funding, make sure you know who does, and just have a check-in and say, hey, I just heard that there's a lot of grants expiring. Want to make sure we got closed out and we did our final claims. And with that, I just want to kind of glance over some of the things that we're looking for. Documentation for successful claims and approval. Some of the things we look for right off the bat is the fund code on that documentation. We need to be able to see that the fund you're asking for matches the line item that you're pulling out of for the budget out of the GRA. And it has to match up with IFARM's coding and everything else. These funds are there for a reason, so that it's an independent fiscal accountability and accounting to that program, and so that we don't commingle those funds. So there's lots of rules in place, federal, state, and otherwise, to make sure that we don't commingle, so we can report to our constituents, to the legislature, to the federal government on how we use those funds. So if we see the wrong fund on a claim, we're going to kick it back. All right. The second part of that is your fund and function program code that goes with it. A lot of times this will designate if it's elementary, if it's secondary. It's a secondary grouping of what's going on in that fund and in that program. From IDEA's perspective, it says if you're school age or preschool. So there's lots of different pieces there. Again, we want to look to see that we're looking for what belongs with which fund. So if I see something that looks like it belonged to another program, I might reach out and say, hey, I think you used the wrong function program code. So again, that's helping us know what is a predetermined objective objective and grouping or program group that we're trying to serve within those funds. And then the object code, it really needs to match up. So if we see in the object code box that you put into those drawdowns, you said you were getting, reimbursed for contracted services, but the expense report you attach was all consumables, we will be like, hey, wait, these don't align on the request. So we might have to ask questions about that because again, they need to line up. Those boxes where you type in the amount of salaries, benefits, and all that come out into a report here as well, so that we can align that to budgets. So it matters what's in there. And that's what we report to our auditors. Supplies documentation, this is the big one. Boom. This one, if you're requesting supplies, it's got to be specified what it is because that is the biggest auditor big red alert button for my auditors, your auditors, everybody. But the reason we want to have that in there is that if we can help to tell you if it was allowable now versus in a finding to, the next year where you have to send a check back, that's why we're doing it. We want to make sure that we have the opportunity to help you if you need to make a journal entry at that point if it wasn't allowable. So it has to be some sort of a comprehensive breakdown. And that's usually one of the biggest reasons we have to kick stuff back is if we can't tell what's there. If I see $10,000 for supplies, I got to know what's in there. Okay, the expenditure period is another one. It needs to match the documentation that you're submitting. So if I see a report that's from last June and you're saying that the expenditures were from October, I'm going to have to return that and say, wait, I think you got the wrong report there. So please make sure that it's traceable so we can align that as well. It looks like you're requesting the documentation matching the date that you typed into the claim. And the next one here that I want to talk about, just again, recapping GRA claim returns. And that's the face I used to make in a district when mine came back. Like, what did I do wrong? So what happened? Budget misalignment is really the other biggest one that we see. So when you guys are requesting something through the GRA for any of the grants, we go back to your CFSGA or your IDEA application and see if you have that in your plan. Do you have staffing costs in the plan, in the budget that we have approved for you? Because that's approving the programmatic terms of what we intend you to use those funds for, right? So if we don't see that in there, we may need to reach out and say, hey, I don't see that you have any of this in this budget, because maybe you submitted it for the wrong one, or maybe the plan has changed. And if the plan changed, we need to reauthorize the plan and we need to do a budget change, okay? The other piece is just missing documentation. I know it's been kind of an adjustment, but if there's nothing there, we got to make sure that we have that come in, or incomplete information, discrepancies in the object codes, again, inconsistencies on those expenditure periods, and just too generic of a supplies. And I see that we've got some folks answering questions in the chat. Thank you, you guys, about GRA claims. Okay, so moving on. Here's something excited for you all. We are teaming up with IASBO, your Idaho Association of School Business Officials team, because what's happened is we've got a lot of turnover, folks that don't know what they don't know, and they get frustrated, as you should, making that face, right? Like, I thought I had it this time. What are they looking for? And it might be that one funding source requires something different from another that you just submitted. So we're working with IASBO team to come up with some accounting experts in the three main systems we see used by school districts that are listed here. So if there's if you use a different accounting system and you want to try and submit something to us as well so that we can put those resources out, what we want to come up with is a format and the keystrokes to get that report, so to speak, a little one-pager of how to run the report for this funding stream that the Department of Ed is looking for so that you guys don't make that face and have it returned. So we are reaching out to some subject matter experts there within those accounting systems, and we're really excited about that. Now, this is kind of a blurry slide, and I apologize I don't have a better one, but just to give you an idea of the things we're looking for, there's various accounting systems that give all the things we're looking for. It shows the fund, the function, the object code, the description of supplies even. So that one's there. The below shot is an example out of Infinite Visions or Tyler Technology, where you can actually have salaries salaries and benefits possibly rolled up at the top of your report, but the bottom part would show the details of the supplies and contracted services. So you can filter reports to be able to show specific object codes that are more detailed from another. And that may not work in QuickBooks. And I saw Mary Jensen is asking for that one. So I'm going to note that one. But again, there's got to be a way to get the detail. It might take a few more keystrokes or steps to get that out of one system or another. But if we can put our finger on what the right one is, that's the goal. We want to minimize frustrations and come together as a community of practice and say, hey, we know that this person never has them returned. She knows what comes out of her system, and that's the one to use. And we're going to just share the wealth with everybody else so you guys know what to do. Now, we just heard from the federal programs team about their applications as far as like the timing on theirs and where they're at. So I'm going to give a quick update about IDEA applications. So that also was due November 15th. If you're finishing up or had an extension in place, please work with our team to try and get it in this week or next. We're going to be reaching out individually to the folks that we haven't heard from. And you'll probably hear from Sherry on my team about that. And really, this is, again, where we have to do these applications to demonstrate the compliance for the expenditures. And so that's what happens in our actual final application that was due the 15th. And then I have a note here too that the final allocations themselves should be coming next week as small adjustments. And the part of the reason on the timing of all this had to do with the way we distribute our funds. So this was the look I got when I was told we had to redo the way we give funds out. And that's okay. I think it'll be more helpful. But what happened is Office of Special Ed said, hey, we want you guys to give out partial funding in the summer to help districts continue the offering of FAPE, the free and appropriate education for all students. So what does that mean to me? That means that you guys all received about 34% of your grants. And there was some mass panic there from some folks saying, that can't be my whole award. And don't worry, it's not. That's just to give you a little bit until I finalize the allocations and get the rest funded to you. And it also was, we have to wait for you guys to finalize your applications and have them reviewed. So my team is also reviewing those fast and furious. And the question, well, what if I already submitted it? The budgets are going to be very, 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 very slightly changed for most folks out there. And so we will do like the federal programs team and unsubmit those and then ask that you revise the budget column only and hit resubmit. And on ours, it'll just be for those two funding sources for preschool or for school aged. And preschool, a lot of it is because folks gave money back because they don't think they'll have any students. And this is, again, just kind of getting an overview of why we did those changes are it's probably a slight adjustment, but the other biggest change we have is that the new opening charter LEAs and those that have significant expansions where they're adding an entire grade at a time, they ballpark what those opening numbers will be when we do our spring opening of the spring application for the budgets. When the students are actually there or not in the fall, that changes and we have to kind of realign. And the other reason that we're doing this back to alignment is that if folks are revoking funding early on and I can redistribute it, I'm going to do it now from the get-go and give it all out because we want to push out as much as we can to you folks. And this is the time when you guys are doing all your working budgets, right? Because now you know what your final carryover is. You did your final closeout with your audits. All the final accruals should be in and payments should be in. So we really want to give that more accurate timing for you to give more accurate updates to your board who authorizes the spending authority, right? If you've got 100,000 in carryover in one line item that's not being transparently authorized by your board, that they don't know about it, that's not good fiscal management, and we have to make sure that you do that. So again, that's something that we're trying to align the timing of. So before I go forward, just in general, going forward for IDEA in July every year, you guys are going to get about a third of your funds. And that's going to be forever after. I have programmed the application to do it. That's what the delay was, but it worked. So now everyone's going to you'll do your budgets in the spring. And then in July, first week of July, the goal will be to get that first third of funding in the GRA to you guys to help you have some money in the bank until final applications are done. Okay, now let's move on to some excitement here. You might have heard some buzz in the news or otherwise on other groups that you're attending, like our special ed directors. We are advocating this year for a special needs fund from state funds for high-cost students. And we say high-cost students because let's think about the cost of one student being 2 or 3 times what your average student costs are because of a specific need. And you know that the kids that come into your district or your charter, you're going to serve them no matter what, but you're not necessarily funded on that. So that has really caused some pain and some, shifting of things around when an unexpected cost that was not budgeted for hits mid-year. So what we're looking for is this high cost fund, this special needs fund that will be there for these extraordinary unplanned events or student costs that are 2-3 times what you had planned on. So it's kind of like an emergency fund, unexpected or really high costs that you just can't absorb that you'd be able to apply for. So we're asking for state funds specifically because then we as Idaho get to determine what constitutes a high cost and how that would be funded. So we're going to be sending out some surveys, but really this is to support those student needs. It's not going to change MOE. It's not going to change IDEA. It would just provide more funding behind some of those costs, which I think everybody would want to say yes to. So with that, the survey should be coming out. We will need your input. This email is probably going to come out early next week. It's going to go to superintendents, business managers, special ed directors. And so what we want to do is get stories. We're going to get the votes, so to speak, on how you'd like to see it funded for this or that type of service, or 2 or 3 times the per student cost. All the different things are in there. So when you see that, please take the time to fill that out. We are advocating and lobbying for this as much as we're allowed to, but we've got our exec team on it and they really want to propose this. We're one of the only states that doesn't have this type of emergency fund. We're going for $3 million, which will get eaten up quickly, but it's a start and we know that it will help some of you guys immensely. So we need your input. So look for that soon. All right. Next up is fiscal monitoring finding trends. So monitoring is upon us. It's always upon us. But what I really want to get at here is that before we go into the slides, monitoring is something that I'm being monitored right now from Legislative Service Audit Division. The year before, I was monitored by the feds and they came out and did an on-site. Some of the things they ask of us as the SEA is, are we training you guys? What kind of trainings do we provide? What, do we have good accounting systems in place and the iFarms detail so that we can collect the data we need? What kind of transparency is there? How do we do the allocations? What type of grant systems do we have to give out those funds, like through the GRA? How do we know that what you're asking for is allowable? So all those things we are monitored for, which put into play some of those systems where we ask you to put in the documentation into the GRA so that we can help you on the forefront with the allowable costs as much as possible. But then we also do program and fiscal monitoring. So specific to fiscal monitoring, we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the trends. And this is both between the federal program group, if you're getting monitored for the title programs and whatnot, versus IDEA programs. So those are separate monitorings, as you guys know, but together we've come up with some of the things that resonated for both of us on what we're finding. And just a reminder, it's the federal regulations that are requiring us to do these monitorings for you and with you to make sure that you've got a proper accounting system in place, that you're not commingling, that you're accepting this legal duty to use the funds as they're intended for the programs that you're operating. And that's just in the accordance with the terms and the conditions of the grants, right? So overall, there's reasons we do it. It's for accountability overall. And then I want to kind of highlight the part about the applications because you guys just went through the CFSGA and the IDEA app, and this approval of these grant applications, then that itself is constituting an accounting document that's going to establish the purpose behind the grant, the funding behind the grant. You're going to take that and align it to your working budgets. That's going to align to what you give to your boards, your school boards, when you're showing them transparently all the things that you're going to do with these funds and the programs you're serving. But again, it's a commitment that you're going to perform the duties under that program, right? So the applications have lots and lots of intent behind them, but they also have a lot of certification and commitments that you guys are making. biggest one here within fiscal management, want to highlight is that fiscal management is a requirement for all Idaho schools, and it's established by lots of layers here. We've got state, local, and our Department of Ed here, the State Department of Ed policies, federal regulations that we're looking at through fiscal management, Idaho code, the IDAPA rules, all of that has different layers of fiscal management in there, whether it's when you have to turn your budgets in, whether it's when you have to turn the audits into the state, or when you request funds as a budget or then report on expenditures through applications to us or through the iFarms reporting, good old iFarms, right? We'll end on with that one because you guys just did that huge report and it's supposed to tie out to the audit. And that's that transparency and accountability to show how we use the funds. And the state here, we have an accountability to the federal government too, to report on all the ways you guys use even state and local dollars, because that tells a story to everybody about what's happening in our schools across the country. All right, now trending. Here's the big one. I mean, maybe I have it, maybe I don't, but really what we're seeing is some areas that are lacking in the financial management. A lot of it comes around updated budgets, you guys, working budgets, updating those applications to match, right? So if you just did that carryover calculation, you aligned the amounts that are left in the GRA that match the CFSGA and the IDEA app. Now we're going to make sure your own ledger budgets match. It should all be a tie out so that everybody transparently knows what funding is available for you to spend. The other part is time and effort. And we've done a lot of trainings, and I think we'll just continue to do that and maybe even develop some modules and small bits that aren't so lengthy that you can refer to, because what we're seeing is usually it's a missing signature. Maybe you do the semi-annual or you do the PAR, that personal accountability reporting that you're doing that shows the programs you're working for. But if there's no signature to certify it, it's not compliant. We need to know that the person that's supervising that activity and that program has said, yeah, Judy is working under special ed, or, yeah, Tim does work as a Title I person, So we want to make sure that all of that aligns. And usually, again, it's one little piece that was just missing. You were almost there, but we want to make sure that it's on your radar. If you haven't caught up your time and effort or put one into place at all this year, you got to usually do semi-annuals for folks that are in federal programming. So make sure you start putting those into place. Start with the positions and pay report and identify who's paid out of federal and start getting those into play. Meet with the supervisors, just start getting that in for a semi-annual signature. And then you take another look at the year end and you say, this is what it was mid-year. What are we at now? What changed? Who moved around? Who do we need to update? And yeah, it's something you just got to put on the calendar. It is what it is, but it's accountability, right? Are the people you're paying out of these programs doing the work out of these programs, right? So anyway, just making sure everybody understands what that means. Internal controls is another big one. I know I just skipped the incomplete policies, but let's just talk about that together because an internal control is part of policies and procedures, but a lot of times it is outdated. So on the outdated piece, maybe you don't know that there's been additional policies that came about that need to be adopted. And part of that, we're working with ISBA right now, the School Board Association, to update their 7000 series that many of you guys adopt to make sure we add in what might now be incomplete from the new changes to the uniform grant guidance, right? So anyway, what we're doing with that is trying to make sure that we take some burden off of you so that you can just readopt that and know that it's got the right systems and policies in there. Now, that doesn't solve the problem with procedures, and we'll talk about that in a minute. On procurement thresholds, that's another one that we're seeing not being followed. So as far as doing that, look at what your procurement policy is that your own district has adopted, because it's probably less than thresholds that are set at the federal level. Federal has higher thresholds, but if you have not adopted that, you can't just go buy something for 10,000 without quotes, right? And so most districts that we see are down in the 3,000 to 3,500 range for those purchasing thresholds. And then you need to be getting quotes, right? So take a look at what you have. We're going to do some follow-up trainings on that. I did have a question in the chat about where we find time and effort reports to certify. Those can be found on the fiscal compliance pages on both the federal programs has a page on the STE site, and so do I under IDEA. And so in there, there's several links to documents. There's examples of semi-annual certifications, the PARs, all of that. So anyway, as far as that goes, there's lots of resources. We've done it on communities of practice, and I think we're going to try and start putting some hot sheets together with links to trainings or modules or things that we could develop to help folks when they just don't know quite what to do or what they might be missing. The other piece is inventory. I've given inventory findings to so many people, and it kills me that the ones that actually did do inventory just didn't have somebody sign off on it. So the person that does the inventory isn't good enough. You have to have somebody else acknowledge it, kind of like the certification and the supervisor over time and effort. You got to have somebody else that helps you be compliant, that also signs off on it and says, yeah, I can see this inventory lives in this building. I've got the funding source, the program it belongs to, who did the inventory, and who signed off on it. And thank you. There's some folks in here that are putting some links into the chat about like the time and effort. So Austin just put one in the chat about the special ed funding page, and in there you'll see little line items you can pop open for time and effort. Look under fiscal accountability. There's lots of sections in there. But I think a lot of the problem that I hear from folks is they don't know where stuff's located. So we were going to try and make an effort to help you guys find that in a more meaningful way, so it's not so hard to find things. But on the missing inventory, we'll do another training on that as well, because again, like I said, I've only had maybe one or two districts that had everything. And it really brought about a conversation that it takes a lot of different departments, because some of inventory includes IT, right? For the inventory tags on certain equipment, who does that? The physical inventory that has to be taken departmental wide, or who has inventory and who doesn't. So it's kind of got to be a whole game plan that maybe is upended and redone. So that's something we'll try to do some more trainings on. Okay, hot topics, news, legislation quickly. This is not a change from last time. I just want to make sure that we have reference to the fact that our K-12 budget's fairly flat, you guys. Only a 2.6% increase. They're kind of changing the structure, collapsing some funds into each other to make it less burdensome, and to be able to use it more discretion on the district side. The funding formula, they propose those changes that have more weights based on the student populations you're serving. So if you have the ability to help advocate for those things when the time comes, please do. And then we're also asking again for that $3 million for the special needs student fund. I had a question that came in from Amy Blaines about, are you looking for general inventory for the school as a whole, or just inventory related to supplies affiliated with specific federal programs? It's both. You guys should have an entire inventory plan for the school district as a whole. What is the plan? Does it have all the pieces that are under federal compliance? If you have federal funds that you buy for things, or a program even that you use partial funding for or not, you need to have that system in place to be able to validate where supplies live and whatnot. So that should be district wide for all inventory. When I do IDEA, I specifically look for that, but I ask what the procedure is. And if you don't have a procedure, that's going to be a finding. You got to have some sort of a procedure. Federal news and legislation, just a reminder, this didn't change from last month. We are in our first continuing resolution. They're probably going to have to push that into next year. We'll talk about that in a minute. The current one is in place till December 20th, right before Christmas break. So the first one, again, is ending in December. It didn't impact the educational budgets that are in place right now. But I have this question here about, well, Republicans aren't going to quite have full control to do the changes quite yet. So how are we going to change with this? What are we going to need to do? Likely another continuing resolution on federal funding, but it's subject to that 60 vote. So that's got to be bipartisan, right? And there's been some talks that, okay, Democrats want to just get it done now, and Republicans want to push it out so they can take more control over it and make some other changes that maybe they would like more than what maybe the Democrats want. So who knows what's going to happen, but timing is everything. So I'm just making you guys aware that we're already pushed out. We should have had those federal budgets in place in October. It's probably going to be pushed out, but there's talks about doing a year-long continuing resolution. So that might be something that we see. Because as you know, as a new administration comes in, there's a lot of things happening simultaneously, and they may not want to have to keep addressing these continuing resolutions every couple months because that's a big push, and they don't want governmental shutdowns. So again, we will keep you updated on any of that. There are some restrictions on the timing of how that works and how they could put in a big giant omnibus package. So if that's what happens, we'll let you know. But either way, that's going to be important to you because those thresholds will help you know what you can budget, and you're going to be starting your budgets probably in January, February, getting ready to do the next year. So as soon as we have those numbers, we will let you know and share that with you. We did also see an announcement of who was nominated to serve at the Federal Department of Education. There's been a lot of buzz in the news about Trump wants to dismantle that department. We don't know if it's going to be a slice and dice and move this to that Department of Human Services or just reshuffle the way some things are done internally. Don't know. But regardless, it's another one of those things that's requiring 60 votes in the Senate. So we'll have to have some bipartisan agreement on whatever they do. And of course, it affects us, it affects you. We will let you know as soon as we have other information that starts coming in. So, we don't know what we don't know, and we'll just keep you in the know as much as we know. All right, recapping super fast. Last month, we did an application refresher for IDEA, and I just have like 3 slides. I get this question all the time. Why do we have to do a preliminary and a final application? And it's similar for the federal programs groups. In the spring, you have to say, I want the money, so you have to give me a budget that's allowable. And then in the fall, you have to report the prior year expenditures to give you your carryover, right? So that you can readopt that full budget of all of the full funding, including carryover for transparency to your board. But you don't know what your actual expenditures are in June because you're not even done spending. So when you give me a budget in the spring, I know it's going to likely change in the fall, but you got to do it to say you want the money because it's one of those pieces that are required for federal funding that you submit a valid budget, and that passes what we call an eligibility test for funding. So that's why we have 2 pieces there, okay? Maintenance of effort, we have those threshold tables for special ed. This is just a picture of one. Usually it highlights the 2 highest dollar amounts, but this is a good way for you guys to just kind of see your own expenditures over time. It's super helpful for you guys to know that. One of the main reasons we usually kick back the applications are if you're missing Medicaid match. If you don't bill Medicaid, you'll let us know that too. Next year, we hope to have an enhancement with a box that will let you just tell us I don't use Medicaid. And the last little enhancement we made, you notice that when you fill in your enrollment, it filled in some of the other areas for you that you already had pre-populated. That we hope was a value add for you and a time saver. Now, PD in 15, I know we're running short here on time, but this is super important. That's probably why some of you guys came today. What are the differences between policies and procedures? And you guys, policies are our goals, but they're also what we have agreed to. So that's our formal guidance for your LEA, and it likely requires the adoption of your school board, okay, or other governing bodies to say that is our plan, that is what we're doing. But the procedures are the steps to get you to meet those goals, right? So this is where changes in procedures might also have to be maybe readopted or agreed to by your board, but also a lot of times that's internal management and maybe not as high as a board. But the written procedures really is an evidence of compliance. And so when we're doing fiscal monitoring or program monitoring, we're looking to see that you have a procedure for something to help you be compliant. Because if you have no procedure, you have a higher risk of not being compliant because of A, turnover, and B, it's hard to remember all the details, especially for stuff you only do once or twice a year. So you really want to make sure that you're aligning and that you know what you need a policy or a procedure on. Now, I have a list here, the biggest ones overall that we look for a procedure on when we're doing monitoring. Cash management is part of fiscal management and that financial management piece. But cash management, you should have some separation of duties on too. And so that also corresponds down below with the policy. So policy you should have and a procedure you should have, but it all ties back to internal controls and financial management. Now, procedures for cost principles and allowable use of funds, that is something that is in federal statute, but you should also have some other procedure internally to help you know what you're doing is correct use of funds. And then on the written procurement, you all have to have some sort of a procurement policy in place, and you also have to have procedures like what are your thresholds, who has to approve what for a purchase order, and so on and so forth. And who does time and effort, right? Who's in charge of that? Do we have that in place? It's a record. So I have the official language in here and the CFRs that are tied to it, but it really identifies that the charges have to be accurately reflected in the work that's being performed, tied out to the funding streams. So that you've got to have, that's both policy and procedure. And the inventory management, that one is another one that is part of procedures and equipment that's actually kind of encompassed within procurement, right? It's all part of the same thing, but there's also Idaho code tied to this one. And then your retention records, you got to have those on file, both policies and procedures, because we have the right to come in and do the accountability monitoring. And so does your board, and so does this, a lot of other entities, and also even for just transparency writing back for anybody that does any sort of records request. You got to have that on file. And then the separation of duties for financial management, internal controls is really honestly the biggest one that we see that is lacking. Yes, and so Mike Jacobson just asked again, do we work with ISBA to stay up to date? Yes, and we are in the process right now of updating the 7000 series specifically, which is the fiscal management parts, to make sure that they are up to date. We had noted that the internal controls were lacking out of that, and so we're upping that. We're going to beef that up a bit. And then also separately, the changes to the uniform grant guidance, because some of the changes are tied to conflict of interest. And you'll note cybersecurity was new. So those are lacking, right? So we want to make sure that those are updated so that you guys have an easy button to just know that I'm going to update this spring or this winter the newest ISBA policies and procedures, if that's the route you go, or if not, some other hot sheet or short guide that you can then add to what you have in place so that you're compliant. Because again, we got to try and save you some time where we can. And so that's a value add. Another thing I want to point out is when you guys do our grant applications, you give a lot of assurances. And this is just me cherry picking a few of the assurances that you give. But you guys are saying in here that you're going to adhere in accordance to the federal regulations under EDGAR, right? Those are specific to education and then also to uniform grant guidance. So you guys are giving assurances that you're doing this. We just want to make sure we help you update your policies and procedures. Internal controls, really also, I want to highlight, that's there to safeguard the integrity of the program, and it helps protect you. It protects your assets. No one can be, can't steal as easily, right? You're trying to protect those assets so that there's accountability on where the inventory lives and who's in charge of it. Effectiveness and efficiency, people are signing off on payroll. There's no fraud, waste, or abuse going on here because you have an internal control system, right? You have somebody different doing the bank statements than paying out the checks. And maybe that has to be a board member that signs off on that for an internal control if you're tiny and you only have one or two people in your business office. But it protects everybody because you can show that other people were aware of something, okay? And then those internal controls need to be in compliance with the Green Book and the COSO, right? So to make sure that everything is in alignment. And so we're looking at that as we're helping to update those policies and procedures. And then I want to note 2 certifications that are required. When you guys sign your life away, so to speak, on any of these, whether it's the GRA drawdowns, you have to certify when you certify your applications to CFSGA and IDEA, or anytime you're providing reports to your board, you are certifying the data, right? So we want to make sure that that is on your radar, that is part of internal controls, right? All of that is an internal control system that somebody that is authorized is signing off on things, saying to the best of your knowledge that it is true, accurate, and a reflection of what is allowable. All right, now before we go, and we still have a couple minutes, I want to welcome to the Department of Ed here for federal programming. We have a new special ed contracts and financial specialists helping me today admit people, which is not as chaotic as last month. So thank you and welcome to Sherry. She's already reached out to some of you guys helping with applications and reminders in the GRA. And then Austin is our new federal programs financial specialist principal. So it's a similar position to me over on the other federal grant programs. And I know he's is on today, so we want to welcome both of them. I don't have photos yet, but next month I'm sure I will put one in. But we really, if you see some new names coming from these departments, that's who they are. They're going to help us with these compliance measures as well. You guys, we don't want to give you findings. We just want to make sure that no one can come after you. We want to make sure that the intent is behind those programs. And that really, that transpires into student outcomes, okay? Student outcomes is why we're here. That's why all these programs exist, right? And we have a congratulations to Austin. She's enjoyed some of his presentations in the past. He did the ESEA IDEA Fall Conference presentations. And you guys, we look to you to help with these presentations. And then now look, we hire you. And again, I just want to update here too. We have another new data person in special ed. And then I have some new names for contacts in the federal programs team. And I just kind of put their names there. Austin, it wasn't vacant, but it wasn't updated yet on our webpage even. He's so new. But welcome to both of those new folks. Make sure you reach out to us if you have questions. And I don't see any other questions in the chat, but we do have 3 minutes. And I do also still want to celebrate all of you guys. You guys keep your questions coming, keep your requests coming. We want to make it easier on you, this value add, these details, even if it's just jogging your memory. Yep, got to do that. I know I got to do that. That's what this community is here to help each other. So if anybody doesn't have any more questions, we'll get ready to wrap up here. Just know you guys are appreciated. You're noticed. You're essential to student outcomes. And that's, again, why we're here. So you guys, thank you for joining us today. We'll look for those questions to come our way. And in the meantime, have a great week and a good holiday. Bye-bye.